Welcome to this session on... hello. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this session on the new geopolitics in the Middle East. Because I'm almost certain to forget if I don't do it immediately, I'm told to say there's a short video. So if we could please have the short video right now, that would be wonderful. Okay, thank you very much for coming this morning. It's about the big question, the really big question, the new geopolitics in the Middle East. What happens over Iran? Does Israel attack Iran? If Israel does attack Iran, does the United States join in? Are we talking about, as I said to Sinan, who I'll introduce in a second, getting the cliches out of the way straight away, the re-Ottomanization of Turkey? Is Turkey stepping into a power vacuum which is being created by the withdrawal of American leadership? Is that even a fair description? Has American leadership really been withdrawn from the Mideast? Egypt, traditionally the leading Arab power, which way is it going? What will it want to do in its foreign policy? What is happening in Syria? If Syria falls apart, or if the regime falls apart, does that create a break between Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon? There are an enormous number of issues here to discuss, and the panel that we have today is perfectly qualified to do so. Let me, since we have an hour, not disturb you with my thoughts much longer, but go straight to the panel. Right here to my left, we have Sinan Ulgen, who's the chairman at the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies in Istanbul, and also of Carnegie Europe. Next to Sinan is Raghida Degham, columnist and senior diplomatic correspondent at Al Hayat in London and founder of the Beirut Institute. And on my, to Raghida's left, we have Daniel Levy, who is the director and senior fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations and also of the New America Foundation. So let's just go straight in. Raghida, what's going on?
What's going on is that we have a new player in shaping the geopolitics of the Middle East, and it is the person of the Arab region, the individual. Not only, of course, collectively we have people want a shab yurid, as it is in Arabic, but I think the most important element is that you can't go back to the drawing table and make geopolitical realignment without taking into account the individual, the power of the individual in the Arab region. That's number one. Number two, I think even the players don't know where we're going, because you have the regional players and the international players, and most are very nervous because the power is not in their hands only as policy makers, and because of this new policy maker that is not under their control, that speaks a different language, and because interests are, there's a lot of worry about where interests go from here. So let's take it on the regional level first. I think for the moment, Egypt is not an active agent of the drawing of the new map of the Middle East, if you will. It will take time before Egypt can go back to its own big role of influencing the shape of the region. I think for the moment you have the Gulf Council cooperation playing a very interesting new open role. They did so in the issue of Libya by taking it to the United Nations, and they were in the vanguard of doing that. And they did so also in Yemen when the final analysis led to the departure of the President Ali Abdullah Saleh, and this probably is a precedent we should recognize, because normally it never happened in the Arab world. They needed to be either killed or pushed out or what have you. He left. He was forced to leave, but he left. And you would see a Saudi policy now that is most outspoken. I've never seen it so outspoken, in the sense that I think they believe that Syria is the linchpin for the new order of the region. That is to say, if you want to speak Iran, think Syria. What do I mean by that? That they feel that if sort of Iran's backbone is broken in Syria through the downfall of the regime, you practically don't have to go the route of a military strike, and it will be probably the easier way to break the hegemony or the hegemonic designs of Iran as far as they are concerned in Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis are rather obsessed right now with the idea of Syria being the linchpin, and they have invested themselves thoroughly behind that. Qatar as well, of course, as you well know, Qatar has been a big player in that same direction, but GCC altogether with different shades. Then you have, of course, I will leave the Turkish involvement, player, if you will, till a little later, but I would just say quickly, I don't think it's about re-Ottomanization. I think they're too smart to think that this is what's going to happen. It's about reinventing Turkey and not reinventing the Arab world. But we can engage on this a little later. And then you have, in terms of Iran, of course, has engaged with Kofi Annan, the joint envoy, UN Arab League envoy on the issue of Syria, as well as they are engaging in parallel in the talks today in Istanbul on the nuclear issue. Iran believes that the survival of the regime in Syria is definitely in its interest, because the unraveling of the regime in Syria would translate into an unraveling of the situation in Iran. Don't forget that there were two other revolutions before 2011. There was the 2009 in Iran and the 2005 in Lebanon. So Iran thinks that in the sort of club of the week that's going on internationally, that they might emerge as the winner, but I think they're thinking in the wrong way. Internationally, quickly, since I have the vantage point of sitting in the United Nations very often, if you asked me 2 months ago what's going on, I'd tell you the return of the Cold War, because the language was so bad. It was almost to the extent of individual insults that went on at that time over the Syria issue between the Russians and the Chinese on one hand, backed by the rest of the BRICS at one point when the constitution of the Security Council was different, and the United States and the Europeans were in the lead on the other hand. Now it's a different ballgame. Now they're all talking, consensus, and I think it's because there's many things happened. Above all, one of the most important things that happened is that they understood each other in the need of time. It seems to me that the Obama administration wants the non-policy stage, or transition, if you will, until later, everything later, not now. And secondly, I think there was a need, of course, through Kofi Annan himself, and who came in to sort of fix the relationship between the US and Russia in order to see can we discuss this, can we talk about it. A little later on, we will go into details of what were the Russians' concerns, or why were they angry, how did they feel insulted by whom, at which stage. But I think in the final analysis, at one point, the Russians felt that they were being dealt out of the new order, whether it was with the Islamists in the region, or driven by the Islamists, or embraced by the West. They felt they were out of the sort of game. But then there was a new interaction between the regional players and the international players. You had never seen the Saudis or the Gulf states say to Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, don't come to our foreign ministers meeting, go to the Arab League, we're angry with you. So I'll stop at that, and then we can take it further.
Just one very quick follow-up. There was a very evocative image you brought up about the importance of Syria to Iran, and you said that if Syria falls, it could break the backbone of Iran. Could you just explain the mechanism? Why is it so important to the Iranian regime that the Assad regime survives, and what happens if it falls?
Well, for one thing, Syria is an Arab country that has been in the Iranian camp. It's already huge to take Syria out of the Arab heart, and already to take, to marginalize Syria as an Arab player and make it an Iranian player. That's huge. To lose that role, to lose that sort of, valuable presentation for the Iranian designs of the region is huge. Secondly, of course, we all know that we have Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Hezbollah in Lebanon, they say it themselves that, they have great allegiance to Iran. So Syria being the sort of conduit, and if you will, also not only politically, but also militarily, the supplies to Iran will have to continue through Syria. You neutralize Syria and take it away from the Iranian camp, you somehow just reshuffled the map of the Middle East altogether, the new order, if you will. And there is another way of the new order that has been thought about, sort of post-revolutions in the Arab region. These revolutions have forced everyone to think reform, but also has forced several to think non-ideology. So this is not the era of, I think Tariq yesterday was talking about the evolution of Nasserism, Arab nationalism, etc. This is something new is going on. I think we do have to be patient in understanding it, in following its details, because I'll tell you quite honestly, I personally, as someone who is both an Arab and an American, I'm always on a seesaw emotionally and mentally. One moment you find me celebrating the bloom of these revolutions, and one day you find me in the pits thinking, oh gosh, now what? So I think, don't underestimate the emotional and mental burden of going through this change, and I think everybody else is going through it.
Right. Daniel, let me turn to you, and perhaps, you obviously comment on anything you like, but let's just look at the Israel situation. Israel is if you like, the constant in the region where everything else seems to be in flux. How do you think that the changes in the Middle East are viewed both from the Israeli perspective and with regard to Israel, in the sense, look, Israel has effectively lost Turkey as an ally, and we'll come to Turkey in a second. Egypt is uncertain. Iran is certain in the sense that it's avowedly hostile. How do you see the situation in general, but particularly with regard to the Israel role in this whole geopolitical flux that we're seeing in the region?
Well, taking us back to that video, I think it's interesting that, and understandable on the part of those who put the video together, that what you saw when you were looking at a video on the geopolitics of the Middle East was a focus on three non-Arab leaders. The supreme leader in Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey. And I think that's a fair depiction of what has been driving the geopolitics of the region. And I think Regida was right to point out that the real story, which we're still in flux with, is the possible return of Arab agency. Right now, it's an Arab public opinion which will turn ultimately into a state power, but we're not there yet. And I think Israel was dealing with a Middle East that in Western terms was rather crudely divided into an axis of resistance on the one hand, led by Iran, and what we called, very misleadingly, an axis of moderation on the other hand, led by certain Arab states. They weren't moderate when it came to their democratic credentials. They simply lined up with the West. Hence, they were given that tag of being called moderate. If I'm going to start, and then if I may step back, with what you asked, with the Israeli position, I think Israel's response to developments has often looked like the response of the Gulf countries. Preference for the old order, very Iran-centric. I think they're somewhat out of line on Syria. But of course, Israel is somewhat limited in the alliances that it can build in the region, largely because of the Palestinian issue. And I think that the more we see an assertion of freedom and democracy in the Arab world, the more difficult it is going to be to ignore or pay only lip service to the absence of freedom that the Palestinians have. I think Arab democracies will be less tolerant of Palestinian disenfranchisement than Arab autocracies were. And of course, when you throw the withdrawal to a significant extent of the Pax Americana with Egypt at the center from the equation, and the Israeli relationship with Turkey, which had a chance of getting on a better footing. There was a UN commission established, there was a former New Zealand Prime Minister, Palmer, put in charge of it. There was a deal basically thrashed out, which the Netanyahu government decided to back off from. And so I think Israel, part of Israel's response, because I don't think it has a good new strategic positioning for itself, other than probably to hope for the victory of Omar Suleiman in the Egyptian elections, which I'm not sure is a good horse to back. I think part of the Israeli response, and it's relevant, I think, to this forum, has been, way back, Israel had what we called an alliance of the periphery with non-Arab states, with Turkey, Ethiopia, Iran, pre-revolution. I think we're almost, in some respects, looking at alliance of the super periphery from the Israeli side, with Greece, Cyprus, elements in southern Europe, in the Balkans, perhaps with southern Sudan and parts of East Africa. I don't think that's a winning strategy for Israel. What I would say is that in this vacuum, what do we have? Number one, I think the so-called axis of resistance is dramatically weakened. Almost irrespective. I mean, I think the outcome in Syria is important, but I think a few years ago, it was credible to claim that Iran and its allies had a soft power narrative, had a message for the region which resonated. There were polls which showed that Sheikh Nasrallah and Ahmadinejad were very popular in the region. Today, for good reasons and for less good reasons, that's no longer the case. The good reasons are that the Arab revolutions have kind of told the lie to the Iranian narrative, because Iran looks much more like the repressive regimes in how it dealt with things in 2009 than a leader of revolution. Also for bad reasons, because the region has got more sectarian, and therefore the ability of a Shiite power to assert a soft power narrative is lessened. So that's number one. Partly it's compensated for by developments in Iraq, and Iraq getting closer to Iran, but I don't think that ultimately compensates. Number two, Turkey. Turkey has assumed that soft power mantle. Almost the alternative is Turkey. In that dichotomy which never really existed between resistance and moderate, Turkey, and under Erdogan, with an Islamic-inspired government, a democracy, with the zero problems, and with a real reluctance to assert hard power, which we're seeing in Syria today, I think Turkey played that role. Number three, can the Gulf step in? Can the GCC states step in? Ragida talked about that. I think it has its limitations, because I think this is very much about self-preservation on the part of the Gulf monarchies. I think they are somewhat reluctant. It doesn't come obviously to them, and they have no model that they can sell to the region on a popular public street level. They're not democracies themselves. The considerations are often terribly sectarian. They seem to be counter-revolutionary. They're far too close to America to be credible. Of course, they have the resources, and that talks, but that's not enough. And finally, we don't yet have a new model of a democratic, perhaps Islamist democratic, Arab state power to assert itself on that stage. Egypt could possibly play that role. Egypt under Mubarak was not a leader in the Arab world because it had no message to tell. No one in the street would say, let's follow the Mubarak model. There was no such thing. But Egypt under a democracy could be that, and it could build a coalition. I mean, Tunisia could play that role, but Tunisia is not enough of a power in the Arab world. I'll stop there, although what all that means for Europe and the US is obviously of interest.
Sure, and a very quick follow-up, and on the question of Egypt. I'm reminded, in November, I spoke to a very senior and very moderate, if you like, Palestinian minister, who expressed enormous fears, actually, from the Fatah faction, obviously, about what was going on in the Arab world, because he was desperately concerned that and of course he was right, when the Muslim Brotherhood effectively takes over Egypt, and it looks like it probably will, if the elections, the presidential elections at least, are going to be free and fair, that this then becomes a great boost to Hamas, which is an affiliate, if you like, of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the dynamics in Egypt are tremendously important, also with particular reference to the Palestinian question. Is that something that resonates with your way of looking at the geopolitics in the region?
Of course, the dynamics in Egypt are terribly important for the entire region. We have to acknowledge that Fatah looks much more like a party of the Arab Ancien regime than it looks like a party of the Arab future. Remember, Hamas won the election. The Fatah-led Palestinian Authority, who we deal with in Ramallah, are not really it's not a democratically elected government.
Yeah.
Now, you have countervailing trends in Fatah and on the Palestinian side. You have those who believe that reconciliation, internal Palestinian reconciliation, is crucial, and with Hamas and Fatah, and you have those who are very opposed to that. The other dynamic here is that Hamas, of course, is a quite unnatural ally for Iran, certainly in sectarian terms, and you don't see the closeness between the Brotherhood and Iran elsewhere in the region. And that is being played out right now. And you see, I think largely for fiscal reasons, some of the Hamas leadership still wants to be in Tehran, wants to be close with Tehran, and other elements of the Hamas leadership are pulling back from that relationship. But, you know, I think Fatah almost worked itself into a golden cage of dependency on Western donor aid, dependency on whatever scraps of Israeli largesse would be thrown, dependency on an undemocratic Arab order, and I don't think Fatah has yet worked its own strategy out in the light of developments, which is why, depending on whether it's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, you might see President Abbas going to the international community to ask for international endorsement, going to Qatar or Egypt to speak to Hamas, or going to Jerusalem to speak to the Israeli leaders.
Right. Well, I mean, it's evident already in the conversation that there are multiple unintended consequences from this. It's not just a straightforward domino effect, is it? It's not like one domino and you can logically see where the next is going. It's going in a whole multiplicity of directions. I'd like to bring in the question of Turkey with Sinan. I started out self-avowedly imprisoned by stereotypes, the re-Ottomization of Turkey. Obviously, I don't mean in a literal sense that Turkey's going to emerge in the way it was prior to the First World War. But there is a sense, isn't there, that Turkey has either lost or has not been properly given a European perspective. I think it's pretty clear that that is now a dead end. There is an argument, and please feel free to take issue with this, that the United States under Obama has effectively withdrawn leadership in the Middle Eastern region. And Turkey, as one of the great powers in the region, is stepping into the vacuum. Is that a fair assessment? Is Turkey, is the feel in Istanbul that Turkey and Ankara, that Turkey has a right and a duty or even a destiny to step up and become a much more important player than it has been over the last, say, 40, 50 years in the region?
Well, Robin, unlike my co-panelist, actually I'm a substitute panelist. And I'm here to replace the Foreign Minister Davutoğlu, who initially was supposed to be here. So if you were to ask him that question, he would first get slightly agitated because we don't like to use the term Ottomanism. It smacks of neo-imperialism. And then he would give you this grand narrative of Turkish foreign policy, after which you would feel impelled to ask the same question again. Now, on the more serious side of things, I think what's happening with regard to Turkish foreign policy is that there is definitely a shift in how Turkey envisions itself, envisions the region, and envisions the global strategic map. For a very long time, the utmost priority from the perspective of Turkish foreign policy makers was to embed Turkey firmly in the West. And to a large extent, that has been a successful policy, with one sore exception, being the EU. But when you look at all the other Western institutions, whether it's NATO, OECD, UEFA, Council of Europe, Turkey is there. So that was the driving goal. What happened in the past 10 years, really, has been a shift to a different vision, where the relationship with the West remains important, but it has lost its almost sacrosanct importance. So the shift has been, and the new vision is, to transform Turkey into a regional power, almost having a strategic autarky, despite being a member of NATO. So able to act independently of the West. And that is what we're seeing in many areas. Turkey becoming much more assertive, much more active, with all the consequences that it may entail, sometimes good, sometimes bad, for regional stability. But nonetheless, that's the new Turkey. Now, to be fair, this is not a particularly new vision. This is a vision that past Turkish leaders also tried to implement. But there's one fundamental difference. In the past, Turkey did not have the capacity to implement this ambitious vision. Now it has. The difference, again, is economics. This whole new perspective of what Turkey is and how it should act is really underpinned by the almost stellar track record of the Turkish economy in the past 10 years. You're speaking about a country where per capita incomes have tripled. It has become the 16th largest economy in the world. This is an economy which, unlike many of the Western states, does not face the consequences of a debt crisis. Its fiscal house is in order. Its budget mushroomed for about $50 billion 10 years ago to $250 billion. And this gives the capacity to the state to implement this ambitious foreign policy. This is a country, for instance, that opened 18 new embassies in the last 2 years. This is a country that just after a visit can throw 300 million to the Libyan opposition when the foreign minister went there just after a meeting. So this is a totally new foreign policy making experience for Turkey. And what I would like to claim is that this is so new that what you're seeing in terms of Turkish foreign policy is actually an experiment of trying to gauge, trying to evaluate, trying to assess what our own influence is in the region and in the world. So this is still, in a way, and paradoxically perhaps for a country that has had a long tradition of diplomacy, in a way a period of immaturity. Immaturity in the sense of trying to discover the limits of our own influence in this new world. So there has been, and that is the reason why some of the initiatives may have been well-grounded, some of the initiatives a bit less so. It's because this is still a period of trial and error against a changing domestic environment, but also a changing, as you rightly pointed out, a regional environment. And the Middle East is a case in point. There has been quite a bit of activism in this region for a combination of all these factors, the economic clout that the country has acquired, but also the power vacuum that has been generated by both a rise in anti-Americanism after the Iraq episode, the fact that there is no true natural leadership in the Arab world, and finally, because of Turkey's desire to become much more important in this region.
You said, and of course I understand that the question of Ottomanization is a sensitive word to use. There's only one thing more sensitive than using the word Ottoman, in regard to officialdom in Turkey, and that's the word Kurd or Kurdistan.
And to Arabism, too.
But it would be remiss of me not to mention this issue, because obviously it's an important factor in the region. Is the Kurdish issue in any way altered by what has been going on in the rest of the Middle East? I mean, one very provocative way of putting that is to say, well, if Turkey is taking this lead now about a Palestinian state, and Palestinian nationalism is, even by a generous estimate, a product of the 1920s at the absolute earliest. Kurdish identity goes back thousands of years. The obvious question is, if the Palestinians have a right to a state, surely the Kurds do too. Now, I'm not so naive as to believe that that is part of the general conversation in modern-day Turkey, or perhaps I'm wrong. But come to that point. Is the Kurdish question in any way altered by the turmoil in the rest of the region?
Well, of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, the intricacies or the difficulties of dealing with the Kurdish question is that it's, from the Turkish perspective at least, it's not only a question of national minorities. It's a question that has cross-border dimensions which are very intricately linked one to each other. So there was a very fundamental shift in Turkish policy with regard to the Kurdish question, when the Turkish leadership, after many years of suspicion, decided to establish a much more normal dialogue with the Kurdish regional leadership, with the KRG leadership. And that did have a very beneficial impact on the domestic situation, on how the relationship evolved between the Turkish establishment, the establishment parties, the ruling parties, and the Kurdish constituency. But unfortunately, the way that things have evolved both in Iraq, but now in Syria, is obviously having a negative repercussions on this question within Turkey as well. And that is, again, one way to visualize that this problem goes beyond the national borders, and therefore there is no really easy solution to it. We have an opportunity in Turkey, which is the new constitutional process, which is coming to the fore. And many of us hope that this will provide an opportunity to address this question and to really create a new order where the minorities, like the Kurds, would actually find a lasting solution to living together in Turkey.
Fantastic. Everybody's been extremely good and been given 10 minutes each and taken 10 minutes. But Rakida is going to come straight in with something, I'm sure.
Yeah, because I'd like to make, engage
Sure.
in, and commenting does not mean disagreeing, in fact.
You're welcome to disagree.
Or it could be, but most of the time. I just would like to comment on a couple of things that Daniel said, first of all, and then if you permit me, Sina, as well. You are so right in saying that Arab democracies are not going to tolerate the what did you say? What was your word? The disenfranchising of the Palestinians. You're absolutely right on that. And I'll tell you why I want to supplement, how I want to supplement what you just said. Because what's happening in the Arab region at the level of people, quite honestly, is quite global. It is about human rights. It is about, it's about, and quite bluntly, I will put it, occupation is a violation of human rights. The bottom line is that, and I think Europeans and Americans must wake up to this fact, because to keep a people occupied is a grand and huge violation of these people's human right. So I totally agree with you that the Arab democracies, I'm not going to be silent about this, and I dismiss those who say, oh, look at the Arab Spring, it just spoke about everything else except the Palestinian issue, which is nonsense. They don't speak about it publicly because it's not their priority on the streets with their own government, but I assure you, in the Arab mind, in the Arab heart, this issue will go on, again, because it is a violation of human rights.
But Rakida, this is an interesting point, just to jump in, because this is an interesting point about the implications for Israel and why Israel is worried about the situation, because it's not as though the Europeans and the Americans have been totally disengaged from trying to create a Palestinian state. I mean, we had the Clinton Accords in 2000 and Taba 2001, which were rejected by the Palestinians. So it's not all that easy. Of course, there are various interpretations of the way things went. But there are opinion polls which continue to show, the Israel Project does them regularly, that the priority of the ordinary Palestinians is not a Palestinian state, it's the destruction of Israel. So how do you, if the Arab...
Regina can come back and I'll come back because you're getting the facts all wrong, Robin.
The facts are completely right.
But I'd rather you get back to him on this one, really.
Yeah. No, these are the opinion polls of the Israel Project which show that the majority of the Palestinians, these were conducted last year and the year before, 2/3, 66%.
I mean, remember, the Israel Project is a project initiated and supported by the Israeli government. You have any number of polls which show that a majority of both Israeli and Palestinian publics support some kind of two-state dispensation. You'll have polls that will show Palestinian hostility to Israel. You'll have polls which are terribly worrying for friends of Israel and Israelis that show the majority of Israelis would be happy to limit the rights of Arab citizens of Israel, that they shouldn't be given a say in national security questions, that their representatives shouldn't be allowed into the Knesset. So you have polls that can show it both ways. Of course, your history of 2000, 2001 was totally off the mark as well. I was a negotiator at Tabor, I'm afraid, Robin. So to tell me they rejected what was on the table, you're getting it wrong, and sadly that's been inculcated into people's collective memory.
Take the anti-Israeli position, it's quite clear, but Dennis Ross, who led the negotiations...
You can have your opinions, Robin, you can't have your facts.
But these are the facts.
The Clinton... Well, they're not the facts, Robin.
Well, Bill Clinton argued it, Dennis Ross argued it. Look,
well, no,
we'll
sorry.
go into it later.
No,
but,
you're not going to be allowed to have that hang in the air, Robin, because you can have your opinions, but you can't have your facts. The Clinton parameters of December 2000 were accepted as a basis for negotiations by both sides in Tabor the following month.
That is true.
Those negotiations were then ended by the Israeli government.
We'll have to agree to disagree, but I think the Israeli ambassador might have a different point of view.
I'm going to respond to another point, Robin, because it's a nice way of dodging that you got your facts wrong. I think...
just check out Dennis Ross, who led the negotiations. But
no, but
go ahead.
But I think the broader and more important point that Ragida makes here, and I think this is why there are two very divergent opinions in Israel today. One is we have to hunker down in the face of changes in the region. We have to hope that we can roll the clock back, and only by building higher walls and higher fences can Israel stay in this region. The other opinion is, for heaven's sake, with all that's going on around us, this may not be the most propitious time to make dramatic moves, but we have to get out of the business of occupying 2.5 or 4 million Palestinians. We have to get out of the business of violating international law on a daily basis. We have to not make that disenfranchisement, that absence of freedom for the Palestinians, a focal point in the future of the region by not continuing the current situation. And the majority is with the former opinion right now, but I think those who care deeply about Israel, not only in Israel but in Europe, should be worried about that.
Should we go to the audience?
No, let me just...
Okay, have a quick one. But let's not get bogged down totally. I would just urge people to...
You're the one who did that, Robin, in all fairness. You're the one who did that.
I would just urge people to take a look, do Google searches,
you took us there,
make up your own mind on this issue.
Yeah, you opened a Pandora's box with a...
But it's an important issue to discuss, because this is what is going to drive an awful lot of the movements in the Middle East.
You brought this to the table, but I'll take it back because I'd like to comment on what Sinan said, because it's really important. Look, in the past order, the old order, we had, the regional players. It was Iran, Turkey, and Iraq. Iraq was the big power that, it was when you spoke of the balance of power, that's what you had. Iraq is now marginalized in terms of the regional order, if you will, temporarily, maybe or not. As we said, Egypt is in a transition, unable to play that role. And in the final analysis, for the moment, again, Iran remains a sectarian leader in effect, because it is building its power on that under the Islamic Republic of Iran. And Turkey, in de facto maybe, because it is the government of Erdogan, is practically filling the void of Sunni leadership, if you will. You will have the Gulf Council cooperations members totally disagree to say that the Arabs are absent or the GCC cannot fill the gap, because they don't want to absent the Arabs altogether. So, in effect, I think Turkey benefited tremendously from the 2011 events because it gave Turkey a very new role, as Sinan correctly said. Take a look at the Turkish relationship with Syria, what it was. It changed dramatically. Right now, you have exchange of letters in the United Nations where the Syrians say, you know, Turkey is part of the problem. It's an enemy almost, you know, in this equation. So I think the role of Turkey is tremendous in the evolution of the Syrian issue, not only because of the borders, but also because it depends how far will Turkey decide to go in terms of the safe passages, as they are called. I don't think either the United States or Turkey is speaking the language of Turkey filling the shoes of the US in the region. I don't think either one of them is speaking that way, but I think the relationship has improved tremendously. There is a lot of coordination between the US and Turkey. And it is, you know, it's sometimes, actually, funny enough, the foreign secretary, foreign minister of the United States, Hillary Clinton, has got to curb back the leaders in the region and say, don't go there. You know, don't give us as much as you want. However, Turkey still has the Kurdish problem, even with Syria, and I'm sure Sinan had already insinuated
Quick
to
one
that.
from Sinan before we go to the audience.
A quick one. Just to give you a sense of how much things have changed in the past year. I just want to take you back a year ago, where all these openings were encapsulated in this very nice slogan of zero problem with neighbors.
Yes.
Now, that's a slogan. It could not have been a policy. But it served Turkey's purpose very well. It created this perception of a country focusing on a soft power, on, you know, having good relations and so on. But we've come to the end of that policy because it became crystal clear that you cannot have zero problem with neighbors, with regimes that have plenty of problems with their own people. So the shift has occurred, firstly with Libya, and now with Syria. So now we're talking about a very different country looking at its own foreign policy, which is now much more values-based. Turkey is trying to redefine, rebrand itself as the champion of human rights, of supporting pro-democracy movements in the region, and this is having immense consequences for Turkey's relationship with its own neighbors, with Iran, with Syria, with Iraq, and this is the new geopolitics. Now, this will help Turkey mostly in Northern Africa in how it wants to promote, how it wants to help those, especially Egypt, where there is a willingness to reset the relationship. Egypt is viewed as the key country for the future of the region. But nonetheless, for the southern neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood, we're in for a very, very difficult period. And especially, well, I suppose we'll talk about Syria and Iran the next round.
Thank you.
Can I
Questions,
add one
please?
sentence on this?
Very quickly,
because
because
I
we've got to
think
get to the
that
audience.
also helps explain the reluctance, and I would editorialize smart reluctance, of Turkey, despite encouragement from the Gulf and sometimes from some in the West, to intervene absent international resolutions in a more forceful way in Syria. And my sense is that Prime Minister Erdogan has become something of a key interpreter of the region for many Western leaders. If you look at the intensity of phone calls between European leaders and President Obama and Prime Minister Erdogan, they see him as someone who has to deal with democratic politics like them and gets the region and also has that Islamic bent. So I think it's an interesting role.
Yeah. Okay, ladies and gents, the first person I saw actually was Bobo Low. Please introduce yourself, even though I've just introduced your name.
My name's Bobo Low. I'm an independent scholar. I have two very quick questions. Sinan Ürgen, you mentioned that Turkey it sees itself as a regional power. But I was wondering whether you could elaborate a little bit on that. What kind of regional power? Clearly, not just a regional power in the Middle East, but what is the extent of Turkey's strategic or regional vision? Does it extend, for example, to Central Asia? Does it extend to Southern Europe, the Trans-Caucasus? So perhaps you could elaborate on that. Rashida Erdogan, you mentioned...
Rahida.
Excuse me,
It's okay, no problem.
You mentioned that Russia felt that it was being dealt out of the game in the Middle East. But I was wondering that whatever happens in the Middle East, whether it's the rise of secular liberalism, the rise of radical Islamism, the entry of major regional powers, surely the strategic trend in the region is that Russia inevitably, over time, will be dealt out. So I was wondering whether you could comment on that.
Okay. Please. Australian ambassador.
Well, Alex Ben-Zvi, I'm the Israeli ambassador here in Slovakia. Well, two questions. One to Sinan about the new Turkish policy, and is the new Turkish-Israeli relations part of this Turkish policy? And, well, the second one is to Daniel. You spoke about the Hamas model, and they won the elections. So this is the model you see for the rest of the Palestinians? That should be the model for them to follow? So Fatah is wrong, the Oslo agreements are wrong. How we go from there? Hamas denying existence of State of Israel. And by the way, your remark about the Arab population of Israel, they have 10% in the Knesset, just failed to mention that there is somebody from the very fringe to say a stupid thing, but don't make it an Israeli policy. And saying, you know, involving personal political views is also both sides, by the way. On your thing with Robin. Don't forget there was another proposition of Israel and another in 2008, Ehud Olmert, and how was the reaction of the Palestinians. Last remark about the revolutions and Israel. All those revolutions has nothing to do with Israel. Never. But it's always used in those revolutions. And when you want to discredit your opponent, it doesn't matter what. Just yesterday, Omar Suleiman's picture in Tahrir Square, the first thing they want to discredit, the picture of his face with the Star of David on it. It was the first thing to do. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, but if you use name of Israel, it discredits your opponents. So I think this is a wrong message. And the last remark, we also should take into account what the Israelis want. We also a player in the region. We also have our interests, either economic, security, and others. And just remind when you speak, we decide, and you are absolutely right about that majority of Israel is in favor of two-state solution. No problem in that. The problem is that sometimes the majority wants one-state solution and says no Israel. That's the problem.
Yes, exactly. Over here, please.
Couldn't resist that, Robin, could you?
As I say, I mean, look, this is with the Israel-Palestine issue, it's such a vexed issue. What I'd say is just go and read the writings of Dennis Ross, Bill Clinton, Prince Bandar, the whole team, and you make up your own mind, because Daniel and I will obviously disagree, and we can't resolve it here. So let's take this away from this discussion. Please, gentleman here. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes. I'm Hovannes Nikogossian from Armenia President's Office. In fact, I'm following up Bobo's question to Mr. Ulren. Can I ask Mr. Ulren if you can identify, I mean, speaking on zero-sum or zero-problem policy, can you identify a single problem, I mean, from Turkey's immediate neighborhood that this policy basically enabled Turkey to solve problem with a single country in the immediate neighborhood at least, because you mentioned the, I mean, leading human rights issue, I mean, for the replacing at least the zero problem policy. And is it time for Turkey to look inwards and to solve the, I mean, the Kurdish thing, the minority things before applying to the immediate neighborhood for human rights issues? Thank you very much indeed.
Just let Charles, since Charles is right next to you, a quick one, Charles, please. Charles Tannock.
Well, very quickly, there was three questions. One was to the Turkish panelists about Turkish-Armenia relations and the opening of the border, and the Cypriot presidency of the European Union coming up, whereby Turkey said it will boycott cooperating with Cyprus during the presidency. If it wants to actually signify goodwill gestures towards the European Union, that's not a very helpful approach. And I think reopening the border would be a very little cost with Armenia. I wanted to raise the issue with Syria and whether Syria can be decoupled from Iran if the Bashar al-Assad regime falls? And what price would Israel have to pay for a peace treaty with Syria? Would it have to give up the Golan Heights if there was a new government in Damascus? And on the issue of Egypt, I am very, very concerned about what's happening in Egypt. And if there is a Muslim Brotherhood Salafist-style government, and they wish to renegotiate the whole Camp David architecture, which I'm sure they will want to do at some point, and that's allowed within the treaty. At what point would they be deemed to be unreasonable in their demands, and at what point should the European Union stop giving the aid to Egypt, which they get at the moment, as do the Americans give a lot of aid to Egypt, because they are being too unreasonable and they're liable to endanger the security of Israel if the whole architecture collapses in the peace treaty with Israel. So these are some different but very interrelated questions.
Charles, and we just have a final one here, the gentleman here, because this is a relatively short session, and obviously it raises so many different issues. Yeah. But let's get, okay, we'll let it, and then the Egyptian ambassador, since he's next to him, yes. It will work, yes.
My name is Ahmed Naguib, I'm from Egypt. I have a couple of short comments about the power gaps in the region and the lack of, or the absence of Arab leadership. We have to understand that Egypt's absence from the regional, its regional role is a temporal thing.
Yeah.
Do you think that Israel, Turkey, Iran, perhaps even Ethiopia could fill in this gap? And in what sense? My own comment about Israel and its position in the Arab Spring relation to Israel. Yes, I agree with Ragida that we are setting our priorities straight. It's not the time to say down with America or down with Israel and all this rhetoric. But part of why the Arabs rose was the frustration with the lack of resolving this Arab-Israeli conflict, and that they cannot have an active say in what their governments do in these negotiations. Now, going back to the GCC, they're incapacitated to have a real active role. You can see Saudi Arabia is supplying the resistance with weaponry, but not enough support to shift the balance of power on the ground, because they're also afraid of hotbeds of terrorism for Al-Qaeda being created in the process. So it wouldn't backfire on it. Now, going back to the whole tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran, can we say that this is nothing but a virtual war that will never actually materialize, but it's nothing far from an attempt to perhaps decrease the budget deficits of the United States by selling arms, starting an arms race in the Middle East? And my evidence of this is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia bought weapons from the United States worth of $60 billion US. So there's nothing short of an arms race being started there. And thank you.
And a very quick one from the Egyptian ambassador, and then
I'll be very brief. I don't want to waste much time of the session, but I believe I have two very brief comments I have to make.
Please.
First, regarding that Israel is the focus of whoever wants to blame the other, or I would go back to what Ragida said, that everybody has to understand that the Arab revolutions are mainly about human rights, human dignity, social justice, which has to prevail in the region, including the Palestinian territory. If you want to make this question out of the table and to avoid any negative consequences, I mean, on the public opinion, it's as simple as that. We have a new player. Yes, it is the main geopolitical power now in the region. It's not any country. It is the public opinion of in the Arab countries. So this is number one. And I would be very much happy to see that the two-state solution really have a potential to survive. Because simply with the settlement policy, with the gradual expansion now, I have some doubts that it is at least will be on the table within few years. I believe that concerning the strategic options for Israel, I think that they are important. We are all facing a very important changes across the region. It's the task of all of us, of each and every country, to revisit its options, its strategic choices, and I believe that it's up to all of us, and that would not exclude any country. What we hope to see is a region where peace, settlement, human rights, human dignity prevail for everybody. This is not against any state. I mean, the last point is the comment on the possible renegotiation of the peace treaty. I wonder where this information came from. Simply because all the statements made by all the Egyptian politicians go completely in contradiction with this. I don't believe that continuing raising these doubts are beneficial. Simply, this is not the case. What should be done? Thank you.
I think that's the thing that people are concerned about, though. Whether it's justified or not is another matter. So, panelists, please, we only have about 10 minutes, so you identify which issues you want to deal with.
That's right.
Rakid, you start, then perhaps Daniel second, and then Sinan. Yeah?
All right, I'll start with Egypt, because it's this is where we ended. I think it's a big mistake to look at Egypt. I think it's a gentleman up there. I think it's a big mistake to look at Egypt only from the sort of the sense of security of Israel. I think it's very wrong to look at what's going on in the region simply from the point of view. This is an old way to look at it. The security of Israel is guaranteed by the actions of Israel. It's not an automatic something, let's just make sure this is an Arab whom we want, and or even to channel the whole future of the relationship with Egypt on the treaty with Israel, because it is an important element, no doubt about that. It is essential, but don't zero or don't sort of zero-sum game. This is all what's going on in the region, the security of Israel. I think that the democracy of Israel has been very much undermined by the several actions of the governments of Israel. I mean, there is a public opinion, and I think that it is divided. And I think how to deal with what's going on will reflect on Israel. It is not about what the Arabs do about Israel, it's about what Israel does about itself. Secondly, and as far as Iran and Israel and Iran, I personally do not think that, I think the Israelis are bluffing when they say they will attack Iran. That's my point of view.
Well, they don't say that they're actually going to attack.
Okay, when they say that it's on the table. But I think Netanyahu succeeded in getting out of Barack Obama in Washington, the sort of like out with the containment policy. I think there was a big success for the Netanyahu visit. I think maybe something was in the making there. I'm afraid maybe the US might be dragged into doing something militarily due to this new position should Iran not understand the message of let's solve this at the table. And I'm afraid that also Israel would like the US to do so, because it's better, cheaper, less problematic. I still think it's a much better way to contain Iran's hegemonies through other means than a military strike, because I think it will serve the region.
And don't forget Bobo's question on Russia, but quickly, yes. Okay.
3 minutes for everything. Just give me okay. Turkey adjusted to the new realities in the region. Turkey in the beginning resisted. The Erdogan government really resisted. I remember writing several columns saying, where are you? You can't go on being with Gaddafi. It took a while before they left Gaddafi. And it didn't just come automatically. And the same thing with Syria. At least Turkey was very smart in understanding the need to adjust. Russia didn't. Russia took too long. They're trying to say right now, they got themselves on the defensive, the Russians. The Chinese followed because strategically it is too important of a relationship with Russia to just let go and just break that and say, well, you know what, I'll think about it later. So, but now you could see shades of differences, and I think that the Chinese impacted the Russian change away from that sort of Cold War, don't insult me, I matter, I'm here. They got pissed off about Libya. They just thought, you know, you did this, you insulted me. But they didn't really adjust strategically as a policy. This, you know, in the meantime, the West was shaming Russia, and shaming is not a policy. Non-policy is not policy, shaming is not policy. So I think that what's happened with Russia right now is that it is speaking the language of dignity. You know, you insulted me, but it's my dignity. It's fine, but don't, you know, don't restore your dignity at the, you know, watching 10,000 people die. It's very important also to understand the Arab region, and again, back to the individual, back to what's going on. You know, when 10,000 people die, it's got to tell you that this is not only a small argument with the regime, it's broken, and get it. You know, get out there and just really, for God's sake, get it. It's broken. I think in terms of the concerns of Russia, the Islamization of the Arab regimes was a genuine concern for Russia. I think Russia got afraid, just started to think, what's going on with the West going, quickly embracing all these, the rise of the Islamists to power. What's the new order? And I am out of it. And they have legitimate concerns about that, not only because they have you know, a Muslim problem inside Russia, but there's the 5 central republics, the 5, sorry, I'm saying it wrong. Central Asia, right, the 5 republics surrounding it. So they got afraid that maybe this is something beyond simply you know, a change that has produced temporarily, in my view, the rise of the Islamists, and they needed to put that on the table, and I think they did. And they got, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria to issue an unprecedented statement, whether you believe them or not, that's another story, but to issue an unprecedented statement saying that they won't just grab it like they tried to do in Egypt, with all due respect, Ambassador, because the Islamists just grabbed and confiscated the revolution of the youth. But you know, the Russians succeeded in impacting the situation to the effect the Muslim Brotherhood had to put out a statement ahead of time to say this is about pluralistic rule, it's not about taking it all. Okay, so finally, in the sense, let me see, somebody else said something. I think I'll stop at that because I can't remember if somebody asked me something else. But
thanks, Ragida. No, as I say, it's a short session, so we have to let people. Yeah. Daniel, please, wherever you want to take any of the questions or just parts of the discussion.
So, I mean, I appreciate your points, Mr. Ambassador, especially with regarding the polling and the situation of Arab Israelis. I think the shrinking democratic space is a worry, but it's there still. What I was pointing out was the polls, which show an increasing intolerance amongst Israelis, but it was really in response to Robin's attempt to use polling to suggest something else. When you introduced yourself to me for the first time last night, Robin, and said, "Oh, I'm a non-Jewish Likudnik," I had thought you were
I said non-Jewish Zionist, which means I respect the right of Israel to exist.
Actually. I had thought you were just being cute. I didn't realize you were understating the case. In terms of
anti-Israel prejudice is obviously part of the discussion, so please go ahead.
In terms of the point that you make, Mr. Ambassador, about Hamas and Fatah.
By the way, it's a major Israeli party. Nothing wrong.
No, it's nothing wrong with it. No, it's good to know where people come from.
There's no doubt.
I'm not shy about where I come from in my politics. It's probably obvious. Look, I wasn't expressing a preference vis-a-vis Hamas and Fatah, or a value judgment. Hamas won an election. And in terms of what's going on in democratic Arab politics, they were I mean, in Algeria, yes. But, the Palestinian situation was probably the worst possible laboratory, test tube, in which to have an Islamist party win an election in a non-state. But they did win that election. Now, I think the West has been right to approach recent electoral successes of Islamist parties in different ways to that in which they approached the Hamas victory. I think it was right to make certain us of Hamas. I think the three principles that the quartet, that the international community applied, were probably misplaced. But I think it's important to understand what else was going there. Because why did Fatah lose that election? Sure, Hamas had a version of social service provision, etc. Fatah hadn't done a splendid job of running their mini self-governance. But there was something else going on there. The Fatah theory of how to guarantee Palestinian political aspirations after more than a decade of the Oslo process had been shown terribly wanting. Because during that period, settler numbers doubled. When we signed Oslo, there were 111,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank alone. Today, that number is over 300,000. So Fatah had no theory of political change, and in no small measure, and I think blame belongs on both sides, but in no small measure, Israeli policies emaciated the Fatah ability to say, hey, we have a political message. Now, the reality today, in which, according to the Prime Minister, Israeli Prime Minister, over 600,000 Israelis live beyond the Green Line, in which 60% of the West Bank is out of bounds to Palestinians, in which 1 in 10 Jewish Israelis live in a settlement, in which 1 in 5 residents of the West Bank are Israeli Jewish settlers. As the Egyptian ambassador said, that does not augur well for the prospects of a two-state outcome. So business as usual, hoping that magically it's going to transpire, is unlikely to work. And your point, Mr. Ambassador, is well taken on one state, except the only people in political power in the region today who assert a one-state solution are Israeli cabinet ministers and members of the Israeli government and coalition. You have now a phenomenon on the Israeli right where people openly say, of course there's going to be no Palestinian state, we want a greater Israel, which, you know, if it's a democracy, it's not government policy, but Prime Minister Netanyahu said
Again, let's
states,
stick to facts rather than our own
so
emotional
facts,
ideas.
facts,
Okay, yes.
facts. Israeli cabinet ministers are against two states. I'll give you all the quotes. Fact. The Israeli Prime Minister said
Seems to be a
two
degree of
states.
fanaticism
The Israeli
in your
facts,
attitude
Robin.
here.
The
Yes.
Israeli Prime.
Listen, calm
The
down.
Israeli Prime
Yes.
Minister said.
Let's
Facts.
calm
The
down
Israeli
this
Prime
fanaticism.
Minister said two
Well,
states.
everybody
at Bar
here
Ilan.
can judge for themselves what this gentleman's attitude is.
The
Let's let
Israeli
audience
Prime
judge.
Minister has never taken his statement at Bar Ilan to either his Likud party.
Okay, fine, whatever.
Robin, I'm
Let's
going to
move
finish
on.
my sentence.
Okay, finish
The
your
Israeli
sentence and then
Prime
let
Minister
someone else
has
speak.
never asked the Israeli cabinet, government, or Likud party to endorse the two-state solution.
fine.
Right, moving on.
No, hold on. Can we let Sinan
No, I
speak
just
now,
want to
please?
respond because some of the other points about
Okay,
Egypt
but quickly,
and the
please.
region. You know, I do think, and it's been pointed out, that part of the Arab Spring was this dignity deficit. And of course, that was about an absence of representative government. That was about socio-economic conditions. But of course, the dignity deficit was also about foreign policy. And I think Egyptians did feel, for instance, that being part of a closure of Gaza, having the Rafah border closed, was an undignified Egyptian foreign policy. I think they felt Mubarak's role in the peace process was undignified. So it's part of it. And maybe just as a last point, because your point there about arms sales to the Gulf, you know, I think when it comes to European, American, Western policy, of course, we are limited in an assertion of principles and values. We're limited by our mercantilist urges. We're limited by the fact that our economies mean we can't do Marshall Plans. We're limited by our politics, so mobility and access and open markets are always a tough sell. We're limited by our history of being close to the previous undemocratic regimes, being feckless on issues like settlements. We're probably sometimes limited by our prejudices. But I don't see it as exclusively negative. You know, I do think that in a rapidly changing region in flux, we haven't got it all wrong. I think there were temptations and there were attempts to urge the West to stick with the old regimes, and they didn't do that. I think they have been relatively open in working with Islamist parties. I think there has been a desire to adapt and a desire to get on a better footing when it comes to values. So I don't want to see it as exclusively negative.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Sinan, please.
Yeah,
inject some reason and some calm into the discussion.
Perhaps calm. What sort of role Turkey wants to play as a regional power? I think we talked a great deal about the Middle East, but there are a couple of other regions where this is quite clear. One is the Balkans, where you have seen quite active Turkish presence and policy, and even, you know, that was quite helpful between the rapprochement between Serbs and Bosniaks, for instance. The Caucasus is not an area where we have seen a lot of impact due to reasons that, you know, there's a conflictual situation. Central Asia as well, because the relationship between the Central Asian regimes and the Turkish relationship is not necessarily good. They have very different value judgments about how a society should be ordered. And therefore, that limits the type of engagement that the current Turkish leadership can have in that region. Another dimension of that is, however, the global picture. And one of the terms that I've heard is, you know, Turkey wants to be a regional power with a say on global matters. And what we see is this desire to establish or to contribute to the emergence of a South-South dialogue. So we've seen a relationship burgeoning with Russia. We've seen an attempt with Brazil, where Turkey did this initiative to at least bring forward a confidence-building measure with regard to the Iranian file, and even now a rapprochement with China. So that's another dimension that's superimposed to that regional aspect. But the third dimension of that is that we see, and this is, I think, that's already been expressed here, a very clear shift towards strengthening the political relationship with the US. That's very clear. The relationship now between the two are excellent, and this is also reflective of how bad the relationship between Turkey and the EU has become. And this is where I want to turn to the question on Cyprus. You're starting on the wrong assumption. You're starting on the assumption that there's willingness left on the Turkish side to do a gesture of goodwill. There's absolutely no willingness left. And this is by and large the fault of the EU. The Turkey-EU relationship has become so bogged down, the Turks have become so frustrated that unfortunately for somebody who has, you know, devoted his life to the furtherance of this relationship, the EU has lost all leverage in Turkey. It is politically impossible in Turkey to do anything with reference to the EU. That's the state of play. And I would even argue that the Turkish government's position on Cyprus is really to create a tension, not to pacify, to create a tension just to show to the European leaders that there's a problem there that you can't forget about. And this is going to be the outcome of many of the issues that we see. That's how at least I interpret this desire to freeze, not the relationship with the EU. It's not about that. It's just going to be the freezing of the relationship with the Council presidency. And after Lisbon, truly, you know, that's not going to have a whole lot of impact. Now, on the, my friend from Armenia, this reminds me of this, you know, this French intellectual who looks at something that works in practice and wonders whether it's going to work in theory. In the sense that the Turkish democracy works in practice. Yes, it has its drawbacks. I've also been critical of some of the digressions in terms of press freedoms, freedom of expression. But fundamentally, that does not take away from the immensity of what Turkey has created in terms of building a pluralistic, secular democracy with a vibrant economy. And that's the reason why we have been talking at great length about the value of the Turkish model, a model or as an inspiration for the Arab world in particular. So I think, yes, there are some drawbacks to Turkish democracy. We're all aware of that. But it doesn't really take away from what Turkey has created. On Turkey and Israel, Ambassador Odededan was one of the panelists here yesterday, and I can only concur with his statements. I think the state of relationship between Turkey and Israel today is a lose-lose for everybody. It's a lose for Israel, it's a loss for Israel, it's a loss for Turkey, it's a loss for the Middle East process, it's a loss for the Palestinians. So I can only hope that the relationship will be normalized, But realistically speaking, I don't think we can ever go back to this heyday of a strategic relationship with Israel. That area is gone, and realistically, I think we can only hope to have a normal relationship going forward, which would still be a vast improvement over the current state of affairs. Now, finally, on the question of Egypt, yes, the fact that there's been such a vacuum in the Middle East is a consequence of the fact that Egypt as a country has really not been able to become a much more influential player in the Arab world for a host of reasons that you all know very well. This may not be, this is a situation that might change, that hopefully will change, but the Turkish leadership is very aware of that. And that's the reason why there's a willingness to invest in the relationship with Egypt. That's the reason why Gül was the first president to visit Egypt after the ousting of Mubarak. That's the reason why Erdogan went there. And there's not only a state-to-state relationship, interestingly, but there's also a multiplication of and a diversification of the relationship among non-state actors. And here in particular, the political party relationship. Now, we know, for instance, that the Turkish AKP has helped the Brotherhood in their policy programs, on their electoral platforms. They've even helped them to write their, the economic part of their program. The Turkish PR company that has worked with the ruling party has went to Egypt to help the election campaign of the Brotherhood. So there are all these linkages, which I think is an indication that there is a willingness to reset the relationship, that the Turkish leadership is very well aware of the potential role that Egypt can play, and that an alliance between Turkey and Egypt could certainly be a good thing for the region. But here, a final caveat, because I hear this very often, Turkish policymakers are aware of the value added that the country has as a secular country. And what this means is that Turkey has been able to go beyond the sectarian divide. So there are certainly claims that Turkey is becoming firmly embedded in the Sunni camp. There is perhaps some truth in it when we look at the game of influence with Iran, especially in Iraq and Syria. But nonetheless, fundamentally, Turkey does not want to play this game. The value added of the country is in its secular nature. The fact that it can interact with all sectarian agents, be it the Sunnis, be it the Shiites. That was the case in particular in Lebanon, for instance. The relationship even with Hezbollah is, I think, a case in point.
Okay, thank you. We've got to close out. Well, as you see, similar yesterday, anything that brings up this region raises emotions, and we've had both heat and light today. I would say, and this is one thing to repeat as to back and forth with Daniel, and I won't abuse my position since I have the last word. One of the great virtues for people like me who try to look at the facts of the situation, is that there is an internet out there, and you can go and check your own facts. And if you find from looking through that I'm right, then you'll know, and if you think that Daniel's right, you'll also find out. It's very, very easy these days. 20 years ago, you couldn't have done this on the panel. You couldn't have said, go and check the facts, but now you can do it very easily. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel.
Did I take your time?